Welcome back to Kelma B'Kelma. This is episode number 4. My name is Eric Balakrishnan. I'm the country representative for Yes Europe Malta. Thank you to everyone for watching our first 3 episodes of the series. They've become pretty frequent uploads recently, and we're hoping to keep it going throughout the summer. Today, joining us is a young agriculturist and animal scientist, Neil Joseph Tirchett. He's been working with our Ministry of Agriculture since 2018, specifically within the Veterinary Services Directorate and later the Plant Protection Directorate. He's just finished his thesis entitled Understanding Sustainability Issues of the Maltese Dairy Cattle Sector as part of his Masters in Animal Sciences at Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. He's been specialising in global and sustainable production. He's just recently started an internship in relation to pig welfare and circularity at Teagasc in the Republic of Ireland. Teagasc is the Irish state agency providing research, advice and education in agriculture, horticulture, food and rural development in Ireland. We actually were planning to have this interview a little bit earlier, but he's only recently moved to Ireland and he's actually joining us straight after work. So Neil, thank you for coming on our series.
Thank you for your invitation, Eric.
So, perfect. Just a bit of a context. Neil actually reached out to Yes Europe Malta earlier in the year to talk about some of the issues and sort of raise them with us, so that we could actually make content about them and spread knowledge about it and disseminate information. And then we've decided that we think having a Kelma B'Kelma interview might be the best platform for him to be raising these key issues. So I'm going to start with a heavy hitting question. Neil, why should Maltese people, like young people in particular, be concerned with the current state of agricultural sustainability on the Maltese Islands based on your experience?
I think, first of all, we need to understand how does sustainability affects or relates to agriculture. Because when it comes to sustainability, most people's perception about it will be how we can reduce or reuse the resources, or maybe how we can protect what we have for future generations. Although these statements are indeed true, in addition to that, when we look directly into agriculture, we're focusing more on the 3 pillars of sustainability. Those are the economic part, the environmental, and also the social. If we look at what the FAO states when it comes to a sustainable food system, it refers to this as it needs to be profitable, so that hits the economic sustainability part, and then we look at the environmental sustainability part by being positive or neutral impact effect on the environment itself, and the later is to have a broad-based benefit to the society. So that is the social sustainability part. So when we're looking into agriculture, the social aspect gets even more bigger than that. So we look at the animal welfare part, and then we look at the livelihood of the farmers. We look of how this supports the community which the farmers are part of, the village which they are in, and we also look how the public perceives the agricultural sector. We look at the state of the agriculture, especially in Malta, as quite in a desperate point, I would say, because it is being influenced by a lot of changes. And if we look and compare the data, in fact, from the agricultural census, which the National Statistics Office published a year ago, if I'm not mistaken, we can compare the 2 graphs. We can compare the values which we find in the data of 2010 and 2022, and we do see quite a significant amount of differences. So, for example, the most clear of all is the amount of holdings. So that is any farm which grows vegetable crops or which grows animals. This decreased in number. So this decreased by almost 16% in value. The amount of land available, which is used as agriculture, is also decreased by 6.2%. And the amount of unutilized agricultural area has increased by 43%, which is quite concerning. So this is agriculture area which technically is not used, so nothing is grown in it, no source of income is made from it, it is just there. Then when we look at the livestock, the amount of animals which we have, there's quite an interesting element, as we see the number of cattle and broilers. So broilers are those birds, those chickens which we grow for meat production. They have decreased in number, whereas the amount of sheep and goats has quite increased. Like sheep and goats increased by 35%, 36% respectively. It is quite an interesting dilemma to see the value of animals which we eat has decreased, whereas sheep and goats decrease, which we don't. I don't know. It's not that quite common to consume in Malta. Maybe their products are. So seeing something like this is quite, it's quite alarming. And I would go back that the main point is, in addition to that, the balance of the diet, how it's also shifting, and also what the needs of the people, what the demand, what they are looking for is changing from agriculture per se. Then if we also look at the age of the farm managers, so that's another table which you should be seeing. We do realize that there's only 17.5% of holding managers which are under the age of 4 to 4 years. So the question is, the aging population of farmers is also becoming a big issue. So who will take care of this agriculture land? And also, if we focus on the very young, so those are people under 25 years of age, we see that this is only about 0.5% of all the managers. And also, if we look at the male to female ratio, we quite see it's quite prominent that the main holders are always male, and there's very few females, women who are working as managers of their own holdings. Another insight which is not in this data, but it's also in the Agricultural Census 2020 report, so I recommend people interested to have a look at it, is that about 40.5% of all agricultural holdings available locally, they produce products only specifically for their own consumption. So they do not sell to the general public. They do not put their products on the market. And although they produce for their own consumption, I'm quite sure that they're not producing enough to sustain themselves directly. So this then brings to the question of what will be the future of the Maltese agricultural sector. We have a continuous development of the agricultural land, which we have saw through different projects happening in Malta, like building of new road, new infrastructure. So we're losing agricultural land in that aspect. Or else something which recently has bloomed up is there's a lot of people who are purchasing agricultural land for their own recreational purposes. So they buy the land and they buy a good field, which once crops used to be grown on it, for example, just to make a barbecue or enjoy a camping. So this is not only reducing the amount of land available which is being utilized, but when this happenings, you're also having land defragmentation, if I said that correctly. If we're having one piece of land, it means that the original landowner is splitting this land in multiple plots of less than 1 hectare and reselling them to other people. So even if you want to work this type of land, it's also really challenging because it's quite really small. So you cannot go with a tractor, for example, in such types of land. There's also a struggle with the availability of the land we have. And also the land we have, like a big farmer who has plenty of land, it's also even more labor intensive to work, because we all know how the land is around Malta. We see it when we go around in the countryside. We see that these lots, there's a lot of them, but they're all small. They all have rubber walls around them. So being such a small land, one cannot just invest in big machinery and just, reduce the amount of work hours he puts in there, because he needs to do it still manually, with the handheld motor, for example, to cultivate the land. So a lot of hours, a lot of labor is put in the agriculture sector, but yet we don't have so much attention by the general public on it.
So you brought up some incredibly alarming and very serious things that need addressing, and this relates back to something that you mentioned to us earlier in the year. And you correctly explained that agriculture is an important global sector that is not receiving the desired level of representation as it undergoes some changes in order to reach sustainable targets. So, could you elaborate on what your fears are?
Um, we do tend to talk when talking about sustainability. Our main focus directly goes on energy, if it's renewable, or how we can use less resources to produce it. Um, as well, these are also true indeed, and are important to be considered. But we do continue to forgetting agriculture and how can this be sustainable on its own. We need to keep in mind that agriculture, the production of agriculture, it's the basics for human life. We cannot live without food. It's an important issue we can put into this. Like, we can live a day or two without electricity, let's say, although that's also quite a big alarming. But food, we need it all the time. Um, so we need to keep on working on it. We are we are tending to live in a world nowadays that will be like, oh, I'm hungry. I will just go around the corner and buy a snack from the shop, or let's go out this evening and grab a beer, you know. But actually, do we ever think about the source of such products which we're eating, which we're drinking? What production, what process goes behind such elements, such basic products? How many people were involved in it? We do tend to forget this aspect. So it feels we have reached a point where we are happy and very free about our living state. It is also like sometimes I do tend to meet people where they don't even know how milk, for example, exactly comes from a cow. They just think, oh, you get a cow and you milk it. But
Yeah.
there's much more work into that involved. There's the reproduction part, the feeding. It's quite intense. So that's the main fear. We keep on, how you say, we're worry free about the issue. We don't think about the whole cycle. We don't think about the whole chain, how it goes down from one producer to a processor to us as a consumer at the end of the day. And in fact, when it comes to uncontrollable global issues which happen around us, such as shortage of supply or just a delay in shipment, for example, in Malta, it becomes visible how, as a country, as such a small country in the middle of Mediterranean, it has big issues when it comes to food security. So simple elements having such a small scale of production, anything which changes in the whole global scenario will have a big impact on the whole chain delivery, on the production of food in Malta. Um, I think it's also important, something which to put out there. We only have about 3,800 hectares of agricultural land in Malta, which is irrigated. So that means having access to water. So if you think about that aspect, you can think that Malta having such warm summers, right? We don't grow any crops because if you don't have water, you cannot grow vegetables, you cannot grow fruits, whatever. So big issues come around the water availability when it comes to production, vegetable production. But yet, we still do find many luxurious houses in Malta, the other island in Gozo, of course.
Yeah.
But these houses would be comfortable in filling up their pools with water, with fresh water, which could definitely have better use. So, or even like if we bring up something which is more realistically for everyone, I would say how many people go to do a car wash every day and just dump liters of water on their car just to clean their car and have it shiny. Like the water use is an important element which we need to be careful on how to use it, especially in Malta. We know how difficult it is to have water available. Like myself living in the Netherlands, especially, I used to just open the water and drink it. Like it was safe to drink. In Malta, although the water, tap water, is safe to drink, you do feel the taste is different. So that is because of the reverse osmosis elements it goes through, etc., etc. But there's big issues when it comes to water available. So we need to put elements that this is preserved and we allocate, we distribute it where it's the most needed. So that is to produce food. And another aspect which maybe it's indirectly linked to agriculture. I would say whenever we go to a store, to a supermarket, and we buy fruit and vegetables, do we really have to buy such products covered in plastic? Like, this is related to agriculture in a way, but we do always have the option. Most of the time, we have to choose a product which is either wrapped in plastic or which is, how you say, loose there and you can pick them individually. Why do we keep on going to buying ready-made stuff, So like ready available, like fruit and vegetables, they have their own coating, they have their own layer of protection with their skin. So if we clean them and wash them properly, we are safe to consume them without any plastic. So if we want to tend to be sustainable, we also have to look at indirect aspects. And then, although as an individual you might not be a producer directly involved, you can still put your part to be sustainable by respecting a little bit and helping out the environment by contributing. Of course, if the demand decreases for such products wrapped in plastic, for instance, then the producers will realize, okay, then there's no need for us to continue producing such product. And yeah, hopefully we will balance out and respect both the environment and also the producers, if everyone does their own part.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what you're currently working with in your internship, which is working with livestock. So, from your experience in operating and engaging with environments where livestock are kept, how would you compare the quality of dwellings in Malta, for example, to those that you may have come across abroad, obviously in the Netherlands and the Republic of Ireland, and maybe anywhere else?
Well, I would point out the fact that describing the sector of livestock in Malta, first of all. Well, the livestock sector in Malta is mainly intensive production. So that is, in other words, all these animals or these farming animals are kept indoors. And one would wonder why do we do so? What's the main reason behind this? And if we look into legislation and stuff like that, we find out that Malta is classified as a high nitrate vulnerable zone, meaning that any contamination of nitrates to the land, to the soil, will have severely impacts on the environment. So the reason then is having animals outdoors will easily impact the nitrate concentration with their manure, and will thus have a negative impact on the soil itself, but with a side effect, which will also result into eutrophication and acidification. So the nitrates which animal manure, for example, will produce, these might leach into the water table or water passages and then end up in the sea, for instance. And we having pollution in the sea and affecting the natural environment, which we don't really want. Additionally, the reason why we don't have livestock outside is, as we all know, the climate in Malta, having a semi-arid climate in Malta, it is really hard to have grasslands. So animals, they need grasses to graze if they're outside. So in fact, when people visit other EU countries, like the Netherlands, for example, or Ireland most especially, people will just say, when they're abroad, like, oh, the animals there kept outside grazing, they can enjoy the sun more, they can have more grass to eat. We tend to socialize an animal who's outside on the grass as a happy animal. And I specifically put the inverted commas happy because I will talk about this later on, and because it's quite a big word, happy. But let's leave that apart. So we need to put in mind that although we don't see farm animals locally in Malta, we do have them, and they are kept indoors. But some people would also then think, okay, these animals are kept indoors, they're behind doors, we cannot see what a farmer is doing. So then we just end up, and in the first image which we see on social media, we easily assume that, okay, then this animal is kept like that. So for example, I would mention quite popular association, PETA, for example, they frequently upload videos, images of animals, livestock animals, which are not kept well. And personally, I do agree that these are shocking and they're not nice to see, and they're not nice, of course, for the animals. But such images, they're quite biased. So first of all, these images are not locally found. So it's very rare. I wouldn't say that doesn't happen. It might happen, of course, because not everything is perfect. But having such elements, such images, such growing conditions locally is very, very rare. We need to be realistic about it. Malta, how big is it? 316 kilometers squared, if I'm not mistaken. In 1 hour, you can go from point A to point B of the whole country. So the country is easily accessible. So if you have a farmer who's keeping the animals incorrectly, do you think that the governmental officials wouldn't be there in a jiff, in the same day even it's reported? So we need to take into consideration that farms in Malta are continuously inspected, and I would say farmers have complained about this because there's always inspections going on. You will have inspections by the veterinary officials, then you will have inspections by the nitrates department to check about nitrates and manure storage. You will have inspections by the EU funds management to check if these farms are compliant to regulations to get the funds necessary. You will have inspections by environmental officers from ERA. So the list goes on. So a farmer, livestock farmer, is not that free to keep animals, how you say, inappropriately or keep them in bad welfare. So having such inspections, you can imagine yourself as a farmer, you wouldn't dare to risk to keep animals not well. Not to mention as well that being a full-time farmer, livestock, for the case of livestock is your main income. And we need to keep in mind that if an animal is not well maintained, it's not provided with adequate nutritional feed, is kept sick or injured, or we can say that the animal will not grow and develop properly if it has these lack of needs, this will be a big loss for the farmer. So we cannot just say that a farmer is happily harming his animal, because it's not the case. If he harms his animal, if he doesn't keep his animal well, it will also have an impact on his profits, on his income. So it's something which you need to consider, which you need to keep in mind in there. I would also, as I specifically said, when we see some images online, it would help a lot if we take the image into context. So images, they're just a snap of what's happening at the moment, and they might not be respective of what exactly happening. For example, in summer, now that summer hits, the amount of, in winter, when we have a lot of rain, rain might go in the farm, for example, which will add the amount of manure in there, because liquid adds up, so animals might look dirty. If you just take an image of that, you will say, oh, the animals are not kept well because they're always dirty. So we need to take things into context. And things which I would like to always recommend to the general public is, if you see a farmer, go talk to them. Well, if they're happy to talk to you, and if they're not busy, they would be gladly share information about what they do, because also they personally feel the pressure of the general public out there that is putting on them to keep good management on their farm. So they also feel this pressure. So we need to be considerate to these people who are working, putting such amount of hours. Like, if you go talk to a farmer, be it livestock farmer or horticulture farmer, and you talk to them, most of the time there's no public holidays for them. Well, not most of the time, there's no public holidays for them. They're always busy on their farm working. They're dedicating their whole life in there. Most of them don't even go on holidays, like abroad. They even never left the island. So we need to look into this. And Another aspect which locally compared to abroad we might suffer more from is the amount of costs. Of course, being an island, the amount of land available to grow for feed is quite very limited, I would say. Although we need to keep in mind that, if I'm not mistaken, about 50% of all agriculture area is used to grow animal forage, animal feed for cattle mainly. So this is also another aspect which is helping the environment keep the landscape how it is. But we're going back to costs. Having such limited amount of feed, we need to import a lot. So the main reason why we have such high costs for even products, or the farmer having such costs, is because the amount of cost involved into transportation. That's one of the biggest aspect we have in there, and the most difficult thing which farmers have. We might tend to say that, oh, COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, those are the main issues why costs are high. It is indeed true, but if we look back a decade ago, costs have been going up continuously year by year. But such global effects, global activities, they were just, how you say, the cherry on the cake. So they added more pressure on having such influence on the cost. And of course, expenses, they went up, but now they didn't go down. Even though things might seem normal now, they still didn't go down. And most probably, the chance of these costs going down is very minimal. I'm also quite sure that no one likes to work for free. So how can we expect that a farmer then works, invests time, invests energy to produce something without earning income? So if he's having more costs, why do you take it such as a big deal as a population when costs are increased? I think just recently the prices of milk in Malta just increased. I think it was announced in the past few days. And the amount of people putting comments and negative comments like on social media against this is quite alarming. But yet people are ready to go and buy the latest new phone or to buy the most luxurious car. Like, why is it such a big deal when we increase the prices of bread, of milk, when then we go for luxurious stuff and it's nothing, we don't care about it. So we need to put into perception that farmers, they also need to compensate for the increased expenses. At the end of the day, the amount of profit which a farmer would make when such prices increase is very minimal. Most of the time, he would only make an increase of a couple of cents because there's so many intermediaries in between. If we take milk, for instance, again, do you know how many people are involved in the processing plant or like delivery of the milk? Like, so if, I don't know how much it costs at the moment, but if one carton of milk costs €1, the farmer would only be taking a couple of cents from that specific carton, because there's so many other individuals involved in such thing. And most of the time, with the increased expensive, these profits are not even arriving to the farmer, because they would still remain in the same situation where they are. And instead of having further losses, they would at least reach break even. And another aspect which local agriculture, I think, is lacking in is the lack of innovation. So, of course, being such a small country and being far away from other countries, the lack of innovation which is imported locally is quite limited. And of course, international suppliers here, they also, when I talk to them, they have a little bit of fear in a way when they want to import externally, like take a ship, to Malta or the plane, because there's increased costs in that. So that is an issue which then results not being innovative, not exactly being efficient in what you produce. But then again, how can we expect a farmer to invest in technology if they're barely making any profit and like having any profit margin? So we need always to balance things out and see things from different perspectives.
So you mentioned some really encouraging things from that livestock perspective, but there was one issue that was reported in Malta last year. So I'm quoting an extract from a Malta Today article published last August, so August 2022. Malta's dairy and livestock farms are generating 200 metric tons of slurry waste every day, necessitating a new strategy to put all this animal excrement to good use. Most of this slurry hails from cow and pig husbandry, but due to continued discharge of farm waste into Malta's sewage network, this illegal practice slowed down the setting up of a dedicated manure and slurry treatment facility. So, what insight do you have towards this issue, and what have you experienced that could be suggested as a mitigation strategy or a solution?
I would say slurry, manure. Well, let's put the differences first. So manure is a dry product, so it has a certain amount of water content in it. I don't know the exact values, but it is more solid, let's say, whereas slurry has high water content in it. And slurry in Malta, it's not allowed to be spread or distributed on the land. So then the question comes up is then what are we doing with slurry? We keep in mind that pigs produce slurry, yeah? And cow and dairy farms and cattle farms, they produce manure, but some farms also produce slurry. It depends on the type of manure management system the farm has. But if we just focus on pigs, for example, what exactly happens to the slurry? And personally, I would say I'm also quite not sure because this has been a question which I've been asking myself and the people I met during my studies since I started studying agriculture back in 2014, but I never even received a clear answer of what happens to the final product. What we can look at, what we can find is that the nitrates directive says how to store it and how to dispose, not exactly how to dispose of it completely, but says how much water content is allowed to be how much water content is allowed to be distributed in the manure specifically used on the fields. But then we don't always use this manure as a fertilizer because horticulture farmers tend to invest into artificial fertilizer. So that's also another issue. But what happens to this manure is quite questionable. There's some farms who dry this up and apply the soil part, and the liquid part is used and discarded. But we also see sometimes news that this goes directly into the sewage system, and if we are concerned about that, the sewage system, then what happens to it? This goes to being with human waste, because that's what the sewage system goes. So it's quite an alarming thing. And going with the human waste, the plants which need to cycle up this waste, they're not quite happy with such system. But luckily enough, I would say that a project by Farmers Central Cooperative Society Limited, so basically this is the cooperative, the biggest cooperative of fruit and vegetable farmers in Malta, they have recently, back in 2018, I would say, they started a project called Cineco, which is helping to utilize the manure and recycle it. And about 60,000 tons of cattle and pig manure will be filtered, and they would get the water part to be reused in to water crops, for example, and then the solid part, the nutrients part, used as a fertilizer. But we still have an issue. What is exactly happening to this, which I don't know exactly the answer to. But it's also an alarming state because we're not being circular if we're buying artificial fertilizers from abroad. So if we use local, what is locally available, we might have the local produce, local stuff, which is more circular, more sustainable in a way. So we need to keep into mind and balance things out. Yeah, I think more work needs to put into such management of manure, such treatment of slurry, because also for farmers themselves, this is quite a big burden. because it's also an added cost for them sometimes to get rid of. Sorry, but I don't know much information about this, but this is what is clear, I would say, because it also tends up to overlap between different governmental authorities. Because we have the Environmental Protection Authority involved in this, then we have the Water Services Corporation, and we also have the Agricultural Directorate involved in this. So it overlaps quite a lot of people, and it is quite common that when you ask question to one person, they will refer you to somewhere else, and then you will go back in the loop, and you would never get an answer when it comes to this.
So you've provided some excellent, like, elaborate details on some of the things that we've talked about today, and we're really grateful for it because I don't think Yes Europe, but definitely not Yes Europe Malta, but I don't think Yes Europe has really had anybody before talk about animal husbandry, livestock in such a detailed way. We have a couple of more questions to wrap up the interview. There are a couple of quick fire questions. So the first one is, it may not be a very simple one to answer very quickly, but will a wave of more people moving towards vegetarianism or veganism in Malta harm the agricultural livestock industry, or will it diminish the strain on the industry's demand?
I think this is not something just for Malta, but it's also quite internationally. And I do tend to say that yes, having people converting, I would say, and changing their diets to vegetarianism or vegan, being vegan, does indeed affect production. But it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because such people are also pushing to have to being more sustainable in a way, although I wouldn't use that word. But the issue goes usually extreme, because I would say extremists who are vegans, for example, they do tend to go to the way extreme part and say that all animal farms are bad, all animals are not kept happy. This is where the word happy comes in. But we need to be careful, because we are becoming a society where we are putting personal human views and values and these romantic assumptions into animal perspective, which is not the case. So we cannot put our emotional charge debate into this. And we need to take into consideration stuff that do these captive domesticized, because now livestock is domestic, do we need to put these livestock animals to carry out every single behavior with their wild counterparts? Because this is the main comparison. Because like, oh, a chicken in the wild is usually grazing all the time. It hops from tree to tree. Yes, it is true. But then, do we know how much loss there is when we have, for example, an animal outside? I would tend to mention a personal experience. I went to a farm in the Netherlands, and they had cows and they had an open barn. So cows had access to both indoors and outdoors, and they could go in and out whenever they liked. Because they had feed available indoors, the cows didn't want to leave the barn. So although they had access to outdoors to a whole field with grass, they still didn't want to go to it. Why so? It's because that the animal was comfortable living indoors when it had a comfortable bed with straw on it, and they had water next to it. They had food fully available for them. They also had a milking parlor where they can get it was robotic, so it was automatic. They could go in whenever they wanted to. So the animal was comfortable in that way, and they didn't prefer to go outside. So we cannot put in the personal element of a humanized ideas into this. So this affects, and putting pressure on other people to also change their diet is not ideal. It puts extra pressure and it's unwanted. But the main concern, the main issue is, how do these people develop such ideas that they want to become a vegan? Well, if you talk to some person and ask them, why are you vegan? They will tell you, oh, I'm doing it for the animals. I'm not to harm to animals. But if you ask them what inspired you to become vegan, most of the time they heard someone else talking about this diet, about this lifestyle. And realistically, then people do not carry out the ideal scientific knowledge, right, behind such elements. Like we do not really compare um, changes based on sciences. We just see something on social media and we're easily influenced. We need to keep up with science, and we need to put science into practice and base changes based on science. Science proves there's different models and experiments done abroad internationally saying why an animal is better kept indoors or why is it outside. Like an animal being outside, for example, is more vulnerable for disease. It can easily get infected. The production rate of animals outside, for example, um, decreases a lot. In chickens, in free-range chickens, the death rate is almost by half when you compare that with indoors, when you have much, much less, like 10% mortality rate or even less. So we need to be careful how people with their changes, how they put pressure on other individuals. So it's not, we cannot just stand be with our friends and someone changes, oh, I'm vegan because I've heard that animal production takes up so many resources. It is indeed true, but we also need to be careful because we need a balanced diet and we cannot just live on plants. um my personal opinion would be that indeed the amount of meat which we're consuming, especially as a country, is quite high. What once was considered as a luxurious product, we now look at it as something which you eat daily. So that is red meat, for example, beef, pork. That this was once a luxurious product. We cannot continue consuming it. We need to go back to the basics, to the Mediterranean diet. Where is the Mediterranean diet that we used to eat 50 years ago? And I think here I have a diagram about it as well. Um, the Mediterranean diet is based on vegetable crops and legumes and olive oil, and then white meat once in a while and fish, and then the red meat is consumed on special occasions. So I do agree that we need to decrease the consumption of meat products, but then we cannot stop this completely. We also need to keep in mind the livelihoods of farms. So having such changes, of course, it will affect farmers, especially those having livestock, and it will impact also the farming, I say, farming management practices. And instead of focusing more on quantity now, we should now start focusing on quality. So instead of focusing on how much a cow produces milk, for example, we need to think more about how can a cow produce milk with less emissions for the environment, while at the same time meeting more welfare conditions. So we should change also our perception about this point of view.
So we like to start to establish a trend with these Kelma B'Kelma interviews where we can get the guests to talk about the role that younger generations can play and the impact that they can make. So obviously, you're a young person and you were inspired in the past to pursue an education and a career in animal husbandry and livestock welfare. And clearly, you're a very motivated individual and you are willing to engage and give everything into everything that you engage in. So, how can young people make an impact in their local community in order to promote ideas and practices for agricultural sustainability?
First of all, the easiest thing to do is to support local agriculture. So supporting agriculture by going to farmers market, buying products directly from farmers. Farmers really like this and really appreciate the help which you give when buying their own produce directly from them even. Another aspect is locally agriculture lacks young people. So whatever your background is, whatever your expertise, interests are, there will always be some place where you would fit in into agriculture, where you can give your contribution as an individual into agriculture. Like myself, I don't come from a farming family. My parents work completely different sectors. I was the first one to go into livestock and work with animals and also study about livestock. So I think it shouldn't be taken as a limitation. And if a person studied computer studies, programming, research design, I don't know, even policy and legislation, um, these people all have an important value which they can contribute to agriculture. And if we contribute to agriculture, we're contributing for food production, and basically that is the basics of human life. Human life, the needs of every day which we have. Another aspect is which I mentioned, which I have to dealt with, is like the sector lacks certain professionals in the field when it comes to veterinarians, when it comes to lawyers. We need people who have these specializations, but then they contribute their energy into agriculture and helping farmers. Farmers need your help. Farmers need everyone's help to support them. And by supporting farmers, we're supporting environment, and we're also supporting our future as a society, as a human race as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil, for that inspiring message, and thank you for so much of your time. I mean, this is already the longest episode in the series, and it will go quite a while to get somebody who was this passionate and this motivated to talk about their sector. So thank you so much. And I'm sure that this may not be the last time that Yes Europe and Yes Europe Malta comes into contact with Neil Joseph Tirchett. So thank you, Neil, for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and interest.
So that brings an end to episode 4 of Kelma B'Kelma. We'll be bringing more episodes on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe just downstairs. You can check out Neil Joseph Tirchett on LinkedIn and Instagram in the link in the description. Head over to Yes Europe Malta's Instagram and LinkedIn as well to see more content that we release, such as quotes from this episode and clips as well. And thank you to everyone for watching and loving this series. And yep, take care.